Ladies and gents, today we're talking about meeting your heroes when it comes to enthusiast cars. And I have many thoughts about that, but first, I still have my 2022 Toyota GR86. I've been wanting to sell this since December. I went to India, came back, had the flu, a few issues here and there. Just took photos today, gonna be listing it. If anyone wants a 2022 Toyota GR86 with 7,500 miles, Jackson Racing oil cooler, and otherwise pretty stock, then check out the link in the description. And as my ownership experience with this car comes to a close, I was thinking about what makes for a great car. And I do think that the GR86 I've talked about many times on this channel is very much a great car. It's cheap. It has great inputs, great balance. It's easy to control at the limit. Oh, those are my CSG brake pads. But it got me thinking, because recently, within the last year, I've been lucky enough to drive some really incredible, really special cars that I held in very high regard growing up. So, a few cars. The first is the BMW E30 1988 M3, the first M3 generation that started it all. The most winningest touring car of the era. Super cool, beautiful styling, really a joy to drive, but when you get in it, you're like, huh, this car is definitely overhyped. Because it drives well, but it also feels like it's from the 80s. It's not nearly as sharp. The inputs all have a little bit of slop and a little bit of laxity to them. The speed isn't quite what you'd expect from a modern car, of course. There are these little things that catch you by surprise. Then there are other examples too. The 993 Porsche 911, super cool car. You can see how they overbuilt it. The difference between the 993 to the 996, huge difference. You can see the budget, you can see the philosophy of the cars were very different. But same thing, you see all these Porsche fans talking about how the air-cooled was just so much better than the water-cooled. And while you can argue the characteristics and the character of the engine, man, these brakes are really squealy. You also have to realize that, again, these cars are older and they feel like they're from that era. Those guys are having a good time. Bump into some Taylor Swift. And there are a few other examples too. The E36 M3 also falls into this category. And upon reflecting a bit more, you have to first define what kind of car enthusiast you are. What do you enjoy about the driving experience? There is nothing wrong if you think that the 993 Porsche 911 is the best Porsche to have ever existed. But what's your criteria? Because if it's driving dynamics, sharpness, speed, feedback, I don't think it's any of those things. There is a certain character to it that's endearing and very much lovable. But it's also not a car that you want to push to 8, 9, or 10 tenths like something from the 2000s and beyond. So that's the key here. If your love of cars is more for the character, if it's more for the styling, the vibe, the way it makes you feel because it's nostalgic, because you were younger in those years and you have fond memories, I get that. But when it comes to driving dynamics, I think the aughts, 2000 and 2010, and plus or minus a few years on the end, because I think many cars from the 90s, especially the late 90s, were really engaging and rewarding to drive. But that, for I think a lot of driving enthusiasts, again, driving enthusiasts versus car enthusiasts, different. Oops, what did I do there?
Canceling.
Even after owning this car for a year and a half, I still don't quite know my way, and I'm hitting buttons accidentally. So, to me, and I think to a lot of driving enthusiasts, that's the golden era, because cars still feel connected, they still feel engaging, but the inputs are now modern. And I actually had a bit of a eureka moment when I was driving all the different M3 and M5 generations with Fenton Sun, and we were talking about them, and something clicked for me, which was that each generation of M3 and each generation of M5 follows this pattern where, so you have 6 generations, and the first 2, so E30 and E36 for the M3 and E28, E34 for the M5, they are classic as an old school and analog feeling. When I say classic and old school, you have slower inputs, slow steering ratio, softer inputs, a lot more travel with the throttle, with the brakes. Feels more classic, feels more 1980s, 1990s. By the way, these radar detectors, so many false positives. I've set mine up according to Vortex Radar's setup guide, and it's still just bonkers. And then the third and fourth generation, which is going to be the E39 to E60 for the M3, sorry, for the M5, and E46 to E90 for the M3. Now they're still analog, but now they transition from classic to modern, because the way that those cars drive, now they feel modern. Now the steering, the inputs, the transmission, the throttle, the brakes, everything is now feeling much more modern, much sharper, much more responsive, much crisper when you drive. But you still have that analog connected feeling. And then the last 2 generations, the F10 and F90 for the M5 and the F80 G80 for the M3, those are now where you get still modern, but now no longer analog and now digital, where things feel very disconnected. And the pattern was that essentially there's these 3 pairs, and the first of each pair is essentially BMW trying out this new style, and then the second one, them perfecting and refining it. So anyway, I actually talk much more about that in our M3 and M5 comparison playlist, the whole series. We're covering every single generation except for the F90 M5, and that's linked down in the description. But I do feel like the aughts, the 2000s, that had some beautiful cars that maintained that analog and modern driving dynamic. The E46 to me blew me away. I cannot believe that car drives as well as it does stock. How sharp the front end is. The gap between the E36 to the E46 is tremendous. The way that they drive it's insane. You can barely even recognize the car, because sure, the size, I mean, it got a little bit larger, and the powertrain, yada yada yada, but the way they drive is just huge difference. And I think what happens is that car enthusiasts, we tend to hype up cars, and there's these echo chambers online where the Supra is this amazing car, the Mark IV Supra, and the R34 Skyline, and especially people my age, the millennials, there are certain cars that are just held in this god tier status, and then you get behind the wheel of one, and you're like, okay, not quite what I was expecting, because no car can ever live up to that hype. So if you are a car enthusiast or a driving enthusiast, I urge you, go on Turo, reach out to a friend, start a YouTube channel like this, and drive those vehicles that you did love growing up. And I think it's actually a good thing to meet your heroes, because if you never meet them, you never drive them, you always hold them on this pedestal, and it's unrealistic. And part of the journey of enjoying cars, in my opinion, is improving your understanding of various vehicles. And to just think a car is way better than it is, to have never driven it, that's doing yourself a disservice, I feel, as a car enthusiast. And there are certain cars that a lot of us just are never going to drive. I'm never going to drive a Carrera GT or a Lexus LFA. I mean, I'd love to, but the chances are very, very small. Or even a McLaren F1. That would be top tier. But now, after driving so many different cars, big thanks to you, my viewers, for letting me review your cars, I have so much greater appreciation for the different flavors. And I think the driving enthusiast that likes something that's sharp and they like to go 8, 9, 10 tenths, especially on the track, they're going to have a very different preference of vehicle than the person that just wants to cruise, that doesn't like going to the limits. Because going to the limits is scary. Most people don't go to the limits, and that's totally fine. It's probably for the best for everyone's safety. And the cool thing is, there's no rules. So you can always change what you enjoy most about a car at any time. Obviously, when I was younger, before I could drive, how could I discuss a car's limit handling? I had no experience. I just played a lot of Gran Turismo, played a lot of Car and Driver, watched a lot of Best Motoring, and drifting tutorials and whatever. But as I got older and as my taste matured, then I realized I like light, tossable, rear-wheel drive vehicles. I'm so fortunate to have driven a FRS, now a GR86, cars that I love. Now I'm getting a Lotus Emira, which still is not in my garage. It's a bigger tease for me than anyone, trust me. A lot of us, when we're younger, we also care so much about stats and what cars. I used to care so much about 0 to 60 when I was reading Car and Driver and before I could actually drive myself. And then as you get older, you realize that stuff doesn't really matter. That's not really the, it doesn't bring you the emotions you're going after when you're behind the wheel of a vehicle. It's the intangibles, the things that you cannot quantify. 0 to 60, top speed, engine, etc., etc. It's that X factor. But again, all of our preferences are different. So who am I to say that the 2000s is the best for driving? Because someone else may prioritize speed more than I do. And if speed is your North Star, then of course modern vehicles are way faster than anything from even a decade or two ago, from the early 2000s. Vehicles today are insanely fast, stupidly fast, even SUVs. These SUVs putting down sub 4 0 to 60s. It's bonkers. But for a lot of you, you're not going to know what your exact flavor of car or driving enthusiast is until you get behind the wheel of a few more vehicles. And I guess, oh nice, GT, what's good? And I guess some advice for those who don't have access to many cars, because I was one of those people that didn't have access to a lot of the cars that I wanted to drive. I would literally go to dealerships and test drive vehicles. There's a bit of an art to that. You kind of learn as you go. I'd ask friends if I could drive their cars. I think that people tend to be a lot more comfortable with you driving if you're not a shitty driver. So doing a driver mod, I started with autocross for a few years, and then moved on to track days. That gives people comfort if they're going to give you the keys to their vehicle. The fact that you know how to handle a car at the limit. But my friends, I'm curious to hear what you think. I think I have a bit of a controversial take in that I think most people should meet their heroes. I think it's illuminating. You get a more accurate representation of the world around you and what cars can and cannot deliver, rather than having this impossibly high ideal that no car can ever fulfill. Is that right? Is that wrong? I don't know. We're all just figuring it out. Let me know your thoughts with a comment down below. Much love, my friends. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my GR86 if you're interested in purchasing it. Link down below. Much love, my friends, and I'll see you all in that next one.